On June 22nd, Apple will hold their first ever virtual WWDC. We usually hear quite a lot about software at WWDC in June, but this year, hardware is going to be on the table as well. One of the announcements that's got everybody really hyped this year is that finally, for the first time in 10 years, we're going to see a redesigned iMac. Looking at iMacs you can get now, they look ugly. They've got these huge bezels and it just doesn't look great. They've got a lot thinner over the past couple of years, but they've never been redesigned, or let's say never, they haven't been redesigned in 10 years. What we expect to see is the redesign looking a little bit more like the iPad Pros that we've got, and what we expect the iPhone 12s to look like as well. So that's getting rid of those round edges and putting in the like more square box type stuff. And it'll be exciting because we haven't had that redesign in 10 years. Alongside this redesign, we're expecting Apple to announce finally that we are now going into flash storage for whatever model of iMac you get. So even if you go and get the base model one or the big 27-inch biggest version, it's now all going to be flash storage. The next thing I don't really know a huge amount about, but Apple are going to announce on Monday that they're moving away from Intel and moving over to ARM processors. And from reading stuff, this is a massive move for Apple, but these are not going to be available to buy, these iMacs with these ARM processors, in this year. The chances, and the earliest we're probably going to see one of them, is going to be in 2021. So maybe it's worth holding out buying one of these new iMacs until next year. One thing that I'm really hoping to see at this WWDC is the announcement of a new HomePod. And I'm a massive fan of HomePod. I had one but then sent it back because I couldn't justify the money for what it does. And the HomePod was announced at WWDC back in 2017, and since then nothing's changed on the HomePod. There's been a couple of software updates, but I think if Apple really want to get into that smart speaker market and compete with Amazon and Google, what they need to do is then release one of these cheaper versions, just like you can get with Google Home and the Echo devices as well. I'm really hoping that this is something that Apple announce, a smaller, more compact, cheaper version of the HomePod. I'll get it straight away. And the final bit of hardware that will almost certainly be announced is AirTags. Now, AirTags have been spoken about for the past couple of years, and I don't know if you've ever used a Tile or not, but they're just Apple's version of a Tile. What they'll let you do is just track things, so like your keys or your bag or whatever, so you can track them through, I presume it will be on Find My, and I think they've got to be pretty competitive with price on this. Tiles are not expensive. I remember seeing a leak a couple of weeks ago that the Apple tags are going to be maybe 40 or 50 pounds, which is just too much, but finally, hopefully, we will get to see them. Okay, let's talk software, and the one thing that's going to take center stage this year is going to be iOS 14. We haven't really seen that many changes on iOS over the past couple of years. iOS 13 was meant to bring some stability to the iPhone, and it didn't do great at that. So we're expecting to see, hopefully, some big stability changes in iOS 14, and then there's going to be some more refreshing redesigns rather than this massive big overhaul of what iOS is. We've seen a lot of what iOS 14 will be already, only because back in March it all leaked, and we've seen developer profiles over the past couple of weeks as well. And then over the past week or so on Twitter, people have been putting out all of these leaks for iOS 14. So there's not much that's going to happen at WWDC that will surprise us, but here are some of the things that we might finally get to see officially announced. The big thing is going to be home screen customization, and people have wanted this on iPhone for years. Obviously Android have had it forever, but with iPhones you can put your icons in a row, and that's about it. You can't do anything else. But it's the home screen widgets that people have talked about for months and talked about for years. We've seen concepts of it, we've seen leaks of it as well, and that is going to finally be announced on WWDC. And kind of in the same line as the apps, there might be a new way to actually view your app. So at the moment we know you've got the grid view, and that is it. You have page after page after page, but there might be a list view coming. And the list view will look a little bit like it does on the Apple Watch. So if you've ever used an Apple Watch, and you can change it from honeycomb to list view, and I think that might be quite nice for iPhone. It's a refresh. It's not a big design change, but it means it's a bit easier. It kind of streamlines your phone a little bit. And a couple of other things that we expect to see is that you'll be able to choose your default applications. And that means if you don't like using the Mail app, or you don't like using Apple Music or Safari as your default browser, you can start to change that. So make your default browser Google Chrome. Or if you are a Spotify user and don't like Apple Music, you can start making Spotify your default music player rather than having it be Apple Music. And from some of the leaks as well, we've seen that there's probably going to be a new AR app, a new augmented reality app coming, which works quite well with QR codes. So QR codes I don't use at the moment. I think they're pretty pointless. They just take you to a website. But on this new one, Apple has worked with a couple of companies and obviously themselves, where if you scan this QR code, it will show you like real-time augmented information about a product or something like that. So that'll be really nice to see, and that will come in even more handy when the iPhone 12s come out and you have that LiDAR sensor. And this might not even be called iOS 14, so Apple are going back to the old iPhone naming scheme, it looks. So they're going to rename iOS, so it's going to now be known as iPhone OS, and that's the same for Mac OS as well. They're going to drop that naming scheme that they've had over the past couple of years, and they're going to start now going to Mac OS 16, so everything falls in line. So you have iPhone OS, Mac OS, Apple Watch OS and iPad OS. So it's going to become a little bit more kind of streamlined across the whole Apple ecosystem. And a couple of really quick things as well, because this video is getting a little bit long. WatchOS 7, that'll be announced at WWDC. There's not going to be a huge amount that's going to be added to the Apple Watches here or that. You're going to get new parental controls, and then the big thing is going to be looking at health, so that the kind of mental health aspect of the Apple Watch is going to become really important. And then also, we're hoping that we can get a native sleep tracking app as well. With iPad OS this year, I don't expect to see some massive changes, because we had that with iPad OS 13 last year. Obviously, it will take some of those iPhone OS 14/iOS 14 features over to it. But there's only one thing that I care about with the iPad. Please give us a calculator. Just give me a calculator app on the iPad. That's all I want. Some other things that could be announced, but we're a little bit unsure of. So Apple could announce their new studio headphones. I don't know if you've seen the leaks about these, but these will be called AirPod Studio. That's a little unlikely that we'll see these at WWDC, but what is more likely is that we might see a refresh of that Apple TV. So that would mean a bit of a refresh, maybe of the box, maybe of the remote control itself as well. And Apple TV is something that I've never really been a big fan of, so I'm not that bothered whether we get a refresh on that one or not, but that looks more likely than the AirPod Studio. A little bit of a longer video than usual, but I've never done anything on WWDC before, and it's all very exciting. So let me know in the comments below, what is it that you're most excited for? Is it the new iOS 14? Is it the new iMacs? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like, sub to the channel as well, because that helps a lot. And until next time, see you later.